We'll find out within the next 6 months to a year whether or not we actually have a strategic dialogue that matters. We'll find out whether we work to deal with everything from release of people in Russian prisons or not. We'll find out whether we have a cybersecurity arrangement that begins to bring some order. Because look, the countries that most are likely to be damaged, failure to do that, are the major countries. This is not about just our self-interest. It's about a mutual self-interest.
That was President Joe Biden speaking shortly after his first face-to-face meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. In separate press conferences, both leaders described the talks in a positive light. However, they remained divided on issues related to Russia's human rights abuses and its failure to take responsibility for cyber attacks against the U.S. For more on this, let's bring in Alexandra Vacroux. She's the executive director of Harvard University's Davis Center for Russia and Eurasian Studies. Alexandra, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us. President Biden went into this meeting with the goal of establishing red lines. What might be a metric of success? And do you think red lines matter much to Vladimir Putin?
I think you have to remember that there are two audiences for a summit. There's what happens in the room, the negotiations between the two leaders, and then there's what happens in the press conferences afterwards, which are really for a domestic audience. In terms of what happened in the room, I think Biden did exactly what he said he was going to do, which is he talked about human rights. He talked about the things that Russia does that the United States doesn't like potentially supporting cyber hacking, probably troop movements on Ukraine and imprisoning Navalny. And he talked about the desire for cooperation on areas of mutual interest. When he came out, he is speaking mostly to the American audience, and he explains exactly what he did in terms of standing up for American principles and then being ready to wait for 6 or 12 months to see what the actual outcome is. All of that was exactly what we expected, and in a way, it's the best outcome of the summit.
You know, Vladimir Putin has been in power for years. He has dealt with a number of American presidents. Can you just remind us, Alexandra, of his background and how that informs his view of the West, in particular the United States?
So Putin came up through the KGB, the Soviet intelligence agency, and it's informed a lot of what he's done since he's been president for the past 20 years. One is that the cadre of officials that are closest to him are people who came from the KGB as well. But I think what's the most salient fact of his background is that he grew up in the Soviet Union, respecting the Soviet Union and feeling respected on the world stage. And for him, the decline of the Soviet Union and the collapse of Russian influence has been a major tragedy and one that he's tried to rectify throughout his 20 years. So his desire to reassert Russian greatness as a great power comes not only from his background in the intelligence agencies, but also from his memory of what it was like to work for the Soviet Union.
So, Alexandra, with that in mind, I'm thinking back to some of what we heard from President Biden today in talking about trying to appeal to that sense of Russia sort of restoring its prominence on the international stage, on the world stage. But does the way that an American president, whether it be Joe Biden or someone else, does the framing of an American president when it comes to that idea of Russia reasserting itself really carry much weight for someone like Vladimir Putin?
Oh, it's very important for Putin. For Putin, the fact that he is seen as having a major international global summit with the president of the United States is an enormous victory in and of itself. It shows that he is worthy of a personal summit, not just a G7 summit, for example, when there are all those leaders together, but he ranks a one-on-one meeting with Vladimir Putin. So for Putin, he also accomplished what he wanted in the summit, which is to be seen as a very significant leader. Now, in fact, if we look at Russia's importance in the world, it is far, far less from what it was, let's say, 35 years ago. The economy, Russia's economy, is about 2% of global GDP versus around 25% for the US. And even though they have nuclear weapons, they really have become a marginal player on the world stage. And Putin's mission is to try and punch above his weight, to take what he does have and to use it well, which he's been extremely good at over the past 20 years.
So President Biden, we know, of course, has spent 36 years in the Senate, served on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and traveled to the former Soviet Union a few times as a young senator, focusing on arms reduction. How pressing of an issue is that right now?
It's extremely pressing. In fact, this is one of the positive outcomes of this summit, is that the two leaders agreed to genuinely restart negotiations on what's called strategic stability, which is essentially arms control. One of the first things that Biden did when he came to power was to extend the New START treaty until 2024. And that was essential because under the Trump administration, many of the frameworks, the treaties that have allowed us to have stability in a very nuclear world were basically discarded or abandoned. And so a return to those negotiations is extremely important. It's also one of the areas where the United States and Russia really are equal partners and have a lot to talk about. So I would say that that's a very positive outcome, and one that also was expected. We knew that this was something Biden wanted to get out of that meeting.
And in our final minutes here, Alexandra, how much leverage does the United States and the Biden administration have right now in any kind of negotiations or discussions with Russia? What is going to be key, you think, to managing this very complicated relationship moving forward?
Well, there's not all that much leverage when it comes to specific policies. I mean, yes, the United States has some things that Russia wants. For example, Russia would really like to have sanctions lifted, sanctions that were imposed after it annexed Crimea and has been occupying eastern Ukraine, among other things. That is not going to happen. Russia would like to be considered seriously, to be treated respectfully. That is something that the United States can do a little bit. And the question is whether that respect is going to be enough to get concessions from Russia on issues like setting guardrails for cyber attacks, on issues like cooperating, let's say, on climate change. Russia is now the head of the Arctic Council, and there's potentially some cooperation on the environment. But in order to work together, Russia has to feel like it's being taken seriously. And this is, in fact, why you have summits.
All right, we'll see what comes of it. Alexandra Vacroux, we are grateful to have your insight and analysis. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.